Matthews. I've got some information over on the counter that you can pick up at your leisure. And I'd just like to briefly introduce you to Bread for the World and the offering of letters. Bread for the World is a collective Christian voice. It is a variety of churches that participate in it. We urge our nation's decision makers to make the correct policy decisions to end hunger both in the United States and around the world. It is a bipartisan organization. It advocates at the national level only. It does not do anything at any of the state or local levels. It does not provide any direct services. Bread for the World is advocacy only. And the offering of letters that we are currently working on is one of the tools that we use. The Bible always tells us about God's care for hungry people, and that we should also hold our leaders accountable. Charity is important, and we do a lot of food ministry at St. Matthew's, but the government needs to do its part. Some of the government programs that they provide are SNAP, the former food stamp program, the WIC program, Women's, Infants, and Children, school lunches and breakfasts, elderly meals programs. So out of all of the funding for food programs in the United States, how much do you think the charities provide?
10%.
5.
Sadly, 1 in 24. Which means a 5% cut in the federal food aid programs, the federal programs, would completely wipe out all of the programs that are, the charitable programs that are being done currently in the United States. That is how significant the federal funds are for this, for food. And advocacy is a very important part of our role. We call upon the federal government not only to fund these programs adequately, but also with good stewardship, that we use our money appropriately. This year, our students went to Washington, D.C. for the for a mission trip. And not only did they work in the food programs, but they also took the advocacy portion of the trip to the next level. And they met with our senators. Today we have Adam Fendos, who was on that trip, who had actually presented the statement to the senators, and I would like him to give a talk about his impression of advocacy and food.
Hello. So if you're looking at this board here, 1 in 24, I was actually going to use that statistic as well. You hit it first though. That's a really large number of government aids. That's really important. And another thing we learned when we talked to the advocates in Washington, D.C. is that for every letter or phone call a representative received, they assume it's the opinion of about 150 people. So that's a pretty big voice you could have. You know, just the people in here, that's over 1,000 voices they're going to hear from you if you write letters. So that's really important. We had a chance to talk briefly with Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson, the senators from Wisconsin. And today I want to read what we wrote and spoke to them. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to meet with us. Speaking on behalf of all 71 of us, we want to share our concerns about hunger. We have witnessed this week the suffering that food insecurity causes from Washington, D.C. to Milwaukee, and we are here to advocate for the voiceless. At the Thrive Food Pantry, I met an 8-year-old boy who told me that he wishes school didn't end because now he doesn't get breakfast and lunch this summer. He said, "My mom was always begging for food, and my tummy growls." At Central Union Mission, a man, when asked how his day was going, could only respond, "I'm hungry, real hungry." Back home in Milwaukee, 70,000 people struggle with food insecurity, and we work with a network of the churches involved in food ministries. But despite widespread participation, we cannot meet the needs of many people who are hungry. Cuts in SNAP and similar programs have only made things worse. We are asking you to consider these people and their stories when you make decisions for our country regarding hunger. And that's what we said, and that's all that needed to be said. All they need to know is that we care about this issue, and that's a large enough voice to make a difference. So I urge all of you to write a letter, send it in to a government official, someone with some power, and you can make a big difference. It's very important. Thank you.
Now, Adam needs to leave, so if we have any questions for him, please, let's do the questions for Adam right now. Do we have any questions on?
Yeah. What was their response to that? What did
Well,
they say?
one of these senators was a little more responsive than the other, but they both seemed very encouraged by it. 71 students, 71 young people is a lot of voices to hear at once. It's pretty powerful. So I think that made a difference.
Any other questions for Adam?
Great.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
I've taken a lot of groups to Washington, D.C. lobbying. Actually, I've taken elected officials to Washington, D.C. to lobby. And sometimes they even have a hard time articulating their needs. So I'm really impressed that our students have been able to articulate the needs and their position as well as they did. So we're talking about the offering of letters. This is one of the key advocacy tools that we have. It is our ability to just inform them of the need for changes in food policy nationwide so that we can reach the goal, the Bread for the World goal of reducing food need by 50%. Letters to Congress, they say handwrittens are the best. Typing letters is fine too. And it can happen anywhere at any time. Now what we are asking you to do is not to do the letters today as we have in the past, but to take your home all of the information, develop your own letter, think about it, and bring them back for next week's and put them in the offering next week. Our letters matter because Congress wants to hear from constituents. Well, some of the times Congress wants to hear from constituents, but it is important for them to hear from their constituents. In a democracy, we have the distinct ability to hold people accountable. And one of the ways we can do that is by informing them of what our needs and what our desires are. The personalized letters are very much more important than a standard form letter, although there is a sample letter containing some of the information that you have received. Unfortunately, with the rise of the influence of money in Washington, D.C., the determination that corporations are now considered people and can contribute funds, money has become the big thing in Washington, D.C. But we cannot let our voice become silent. We need to continue to participate and let Congress know of our desires. Each year, we've had some victories out in Washington, D.C. We've been able to block some of the budget cuts in the past, the Bread for the World has. We have strengthened domestic food programs. Bread helped ensure that the Great Recession did not lead to major increases in hungers. So it is a program that has had a lot of impact in Washington, D.C. So the goal this year is to actually reform the U.S. food aid policy. Many of our U.S. food aid policies were developed in the 1950s, shortly after World War II. And they were developed at a time that the country was trying to rebuild, and we were trying to get the industry and the community back in operation. So a lot of these policies were good for 1950, but they're not good for 2015. So we need to look at some changes to the U.S. food aid program that will help. As we all know, the Bible talks about hunger a great deal and feeding the hungry. The Bible also tells us that we need to take care of our neighbors, whether they are next door or in another country around the world. The foreign food aid is funded by taxpayers' dollars. It meets humanitarian needs. We do emergency food aid during droughts and famines, wars, disasters, and we do longer-term goals, programs. Those longer-term programs include helping other countries develop their own locally sourced food networks. And those are important for sustaining food around the world. And if you've got questions at any time, pop in with them. Who gets our foreign food aids? The top recipients of the emergency food aid programs in 2012 were primarily in Africa, which has suffered from that severe drought. Ethiopia, the Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, and Chad. The top recipients of the development food aid, developing local sources of food and sustainable foods, were Ethiopia, Bangladesh, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Malawi, and the South Sudan. In South America and the Caribbean, our top food aid recipients were Haiti, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, and Honduras. Most of the food used in the foreign food aid program right now is grown in the United States, which means that we have to grow it here, store it here, have it available, and then ship it someplace. At least, the law also requires that at least 50% of the food that is shipped from the United States to the countries in need has to be done on US shippers. Our shipping industry is not as large as it used to be. It's not as large as it was back in the 1950s. There are more foreign vessels available to ship than there are US vessels available. So that the lack of capacity, the lack of the shipping, the fact that we have to take food from sources here and get them someplace else, it's slow to deliver and it's very costly. Here's what Bread for the World is looking for. We are looking for a more flexible system to deliver the food. We know that there are times that we're going to have to take food from the United States and get it someplace quickly. That will still always be part of the project. But we need to get more of the food purchased locally. We need to be able to send money someplace so that they can buy local foodstuffs. It will get there faster. We won't have the transportation costs that go with it. And we'll be able to increase the number of people who are served. In addition, if we are buying food in, say, Tanzania, from the farmers in Tanzania, for other people in Tanzania who are hungry, we have now helped their economy, which is another goal. There we go. One of the other goals for Bread for the World is to improve their nutrition, the nutritional value of the food. In the US food aid program, it's kind of like surplus food. Whatever we have a surplus food is what we have available to ship. It's not necessarily the most nutritious food that needs to go. You know, if we have an excess of corn, the corn is going. If we have an excess of wheat, the wheat will go. But it's not going to be a balanced diet that is needed. And so one of the goals is to try to get a higher quality, a more diverse type of food into these countries faster. Because research has shown that the first 1,000 days in a child's life are the most important nutritionally. That from the time that the child is born until they're about 2.5 years old, if they have suffered from hunger, severe hunger, they will have problems for the rest of their life, both physically, mentally, developmentally. So it is very important that we get food, nutritional food, into these communities as quickly as possible. We're not asking for more money in Bread for the World for the foreign aid programs. We're asking for the monies that are there to be spent better. We can't afford to have more budget cuts coming into this program because it is just far too important. And if I can look at it, I believe the number is in foreign food aid, or the food aid budget, is approximately 0.5% of the entire federal budget. It is not a huge amount. A 5% decrease is not going to save that much money, and it's going to hurt far more than it will help. So our goal is to try to maintain this current funding level and then support changes in the program to make us, to allow us to spend that money smarter. If you are moved to write a letter, and I'm hopeful that all of you are, don't forget to do the ask. So many times letters go to Washington, D.C., and they kind of lay out the problems, and they say, well, this is, you know, the things that are happening, and they never get to the point of asking what needs to be done. The key when you're dealing with legislators, whether it's locally or in Madison or in Washington, D.C., is that you always need to have the ask. You have to ask them what you want them to do. the phrases like, in every memo that I used to send out in Madison always ended with, therefore we respectfully ask that you do whatever. And here they're suggesting that you go to Congress. I urge you to protect and reform the U.S. food aid in ways that increase efficiency, increase nutritional equality, and maintain funding levels. And the tips whenever you're dealing with legislators is to keep your letter brief. They're not going to pour through a 5-page memo. Unfortunately, with some of the issues that I used to deal with, we always had to do 5-page memos, but we tried to do a summary on top because very few people ever read all the way through. Tell them your own story. If you have worked on food programs in the Milwaukee area, if you have traveled in other countries and have seen some of the poverty and seen some of the need for food in other countries, those types of stories always help. Whether you have family members who have been participants in the WIC program, those programs are important and critical to relaying your story to them. Yes?
I'm wondering about Lutheran World Relief and Feed My Starving Children and Food for the Poor. Are they more efficient? Do they, you know, what portion of feeding the hungry in the world they do?
Ed, do you have any information on that?
I can't give percentages, no.
I would think they would probably fall into like the 1 in 24.
Right.
That all comes into that portion of it. Because that is all privately financed, they do not have the constraints that the other, that the federal foreign aid does. And that is probably the model that is used, although I have not read that in any of the documents that they've sent to us, that is the model that they've used in developing the changes that they believe would be very useful. The other things that they're asking you to do is to explain why you care about hunger, and then you make sure you do the ask, and you include your name and home address. And we've got information about the addresses for the House members, the Senate members. We also have labels out on the table in the Commons if you just want to pick up some labels. So with that, Ed, do you have some things you'd like to add?
Well, there is, just in the latest newsletter from Bread for the World, I see that there is actually a bill that we can support which tries to do the things that this presentation says, and it doesn't have a number, but it's in the Senate and it's bipartisan. That's an important thing to remember. Bread for the World likes to work across the aisle with both parties, and so they're not just looking at one party. This bill is called, if you have a piece of paper or something to write on, the Food for Peace Reform Act. Food for Peace Reform Act of 2014, obviously. And it's sponsored by Senators Bob Corker, a Republican from Tennessee, and Chris Coons from Delaware, Democrat. You don't need to know those names, but I cite them just to show the bipartisan background. My impression is that if this is going to happen, that we will update and streamline the way we get the food aid to other countries. It's going to come out of the Senate, not the House. In fact, if I'm correct, although I haven't been able to verify it specifically, but there is suggestion of that in the same newsletter, the House has actually taken some action in the opposite direction to ask that a higher percentage of the food we send goes on U.S. shipping and so on. You know, it's impressive to me that there is a way we can help people, hungry people, without having to increase the dollars spent in the ways that Darla has said. At the same time, there will be those who say, oh yeah, but we shouldn't cut back on buying from U.S. farmers, and we shouldn't cut back on U.S. shipping. it's like 1% of the cargo that goes out in US ships is this food relief. So it's not, I mean, if you cut back on it, it's not going to make any difference to the shippers. Same thing with the agricultural help. It's about 1% of the total agricultural product that we produce that goes overseas to help hungry people. So if we buy it over there instead of here, it's not going to make much difference to our farmers, where it can make a huge difference to the farmers in these countries that are trying to build up their local products and build up their local farming industry. So those are other things that have impressed me.
And the thing to add about the food surplus programs in the United States, the ones that give the money or give the food for these types of programs, there's a need in the United States. Those food surplus programs can continue in the United States and be used locally and not be sent over. Gloria?
I think it's significant that the food we send over is our food. If we send money over there, the food they get is what's familiar to them. It's the food that they're used to. They will eat it, they will use it. But some of the stuff we send over, I think they don't know what to do with.
That's true.
So I think that's important.
What are they doing to develop, you know, one of the goals was to send more, or to have more nutritionally valuable food. A couple of years ago, probably more than a couple, if I say two, it's probably been more, there was a program on, I think it was Frontline, it was on the public channel in Chicago, and they were talking about a food product that has already been developed, that if they just had the money, they could, and they said they could end world hunger with this. It's like it's not peanut butter, but it's like a peanut butter substance, and it's in a pack, and it doesn't, you know, it is highly, highly nutritional, and particularly for young children. And in Africa, they were able to save children who were on the brink of that point where they either can save them or not. And they saved a number of children with this particular food product. And they said that people are not really paying attention to what research is doing in terms of developing an alternative food source. Is Bread for the World talking about any of that, or?
In the information I've seen, I've not seen anything where they get into that specific. But then again, Bread for the World does not provide food. It provides advocacy for food funding.
Okay.
They are not a direct supplier of food programs or services.
But in the advocacy part of it, are they advocating for the research of alternative food sources that can be easily transported and easily kept once they get there? One of the points they made was that some of the food that we send needs particular storage kinds of things, you know, with whether these are in packets and don't.
I would say it's possible that they are. I don't happen to know about it either. Bread for the World has a staff which is involved in advocacy work with members of Congress year-round on a lot of issues. What we're emphasizing here, and what they want us to emphasize, is this particular issue this year. So other things are going on that are aside from this issue, and we know less about that.
I'm just curious.
There's a couple of places that may be helpful as far as those questions go. One might be that there's a subset of, I think, at Luther College that's funded by Norman Borlaug's family and estate. And they've done some research, I know, in the past of kind of food development. So they may have some resources if you want to learn more. And then also through the UN World Food Program with MME at the end, program. That may be a helpful place to look about those pieces as well.
Okay. We also have some materials over here. Some of them are, I consider, very useful. One of them is just a brief description of advocacy and how to perform advocacy and what to do in order to make your voice heard. And he also gives you kind of the simplified version of how a bill becomes a law. Well, let's put it this way, the non-messy version of how a bill becomes a law.
Is there a cartoon that goes with that, Darla?
We used to have one of those in Madison, so.
It's like sausage.
Actually, that was
I trust you.
that was Walter John Chilson's common phrase: is those people who like good laws and good sausage should not watch either be made. I loved working with Walter John; he always had gems. There are also some other information on the reforming U.S. food aid policies, both in the United States and overseas, that are there. And as I said, I encourage all of you to make your voice be heard, because it's very important. It's very significant when senators and representatives get letters. Sometimes they ignore them, but sometimes they'll actually respond and work on some of the issues. Matt?
One thing I found too, if you get email alerts, either from Bread for the World, also the Lutheran Office of Public Policy in Wisconsin, Cindy Crane was here last year. They'll send you email or on Facebook alerts if there's specific bills they know are going to vote. So I've actually called each of our senators' offices and done similar things. I feel really scary doing it like that. But both have been really, Senator Johnson and Senator Baldwin have been, their staffers have been happy to hear and feed us back that we care what our constituents think. And so that's another way, in addition to the letters, if there's specific action they know are coming, you can sign up for those and get those pieces as well.
That's a very good point, because I know Bread for the World comes out probably at least 2 to 3 times a week with an alert as to something that's happening in Washington, D.C. that they would like people to be aware of, whether it's been immigration reform or whether it's been unemployment compensation extensions or food programs or SNAP funding. You know, they're constantly working and identifying issues that concern the churches around the world or around the United States who are extremely interested in performing services for the least of us.
That might be worth, I mean, it's not germane particularly to this issue, but if you aren't aware of what Bread for the World really is constituted by, it's a coalition of Christian organizations. Now, it's self-consciously Christian. It does not include Jews or Muslims or other people, but it's a wide breadth of Christian churches that have formed this coalition over the years to work specifically on the issues of hunger and nutrition. So when you do participate in something like this, you are joining other fellow Christians in an effort which, as Darla said at the beginning, is clearly in line with our biblical understanding of who we are. So I always like to emphasize that aspect of Bread too.
Any other questions? If not, I encourage you to get your pens out and start writing letters and bring them back next week for the offering of letters. Thank you very much.